Today we're going to see what we can make with this piece of mulberry. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to take this piece of mulberry and we're going to see what's inside here. I'm going to make a natural edge bowl. I'm not expecting this bark to last. This bowl blank has been sitting around for about 6-7 months. So the exterior of it's somewhat dry. The interior will still have some moisture in it. A couple issues that I'm a little bit concerned with. The bark's a little loose. And we've got this branch enclosure in there too. And I don't know how far that's going to go through there. But that's part of the fun and the mystery of turning a crotched natural edge bowl like this. So I'm going to use a 4-spur drive center and the tailstock to mount this to the lathe to get started. So let's start the process. Before I mount this blank to the lathe, I really need to take off this loose bark. Now the 4-jaw drive center will grip this piece really well, but if it's in loose bark, it could become a bit of an issue. So I use a chisel and a mallet and simply chisel away any of the loose bark in the center of the blank. And we put the 4-drive center into the lathe headstock, and then I'm going to center up the bowl blank and bring up the tailstock. Now the interesting thing about this is the flat area on the bowl blank that you're seeing right now was cut in the field with a chainsaw, and that may or may not be where I want the bottom of this bowl blank to line up. What's more important are the top edges of this particular bowl. Since this is a live edge or a natural edge bowl, I want the two opposite high wings to be about the same height. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the time to readjust the tailstock so that both of the high spots on the rim are lined up together. Taking a little extra time to do that is going to make a big difference in the final bowl. However, if you can see, the bottom of the bowl is rather wobbly at this point. So I have to keep the lathe speed slow because I'm going to introduce a lot of vibrations because this bowl blank is not balanced weight-wise. This is my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. And I'm going to use this to just start taking off the corners of this bowl blank. Now, as this blank gets more trued up, I'm going to be able to speed the lathe up. But for right now, I need to keep that lathe speed slow. If I go much faster than this, I'm going to introduce vibration. You can see how I'm taking it off the corner on one side, but I haven't even touched that side that's visible right there. It's because the bottom is not flat. And that's totally fine because we're going to remove all that material. So I'm just going to keep working away here. And by the way, the lathe is not vibrating. The mount for the camera was not fully secured, and the shavings hitting the camera are moving the camera. So it makes it look like as if the lathe and everything is bouncing around, and it's not. There you can see I'm just whittling away that corner. I'm going to go ahead and flatten off the face of this. That's going to help me balance the piece overall as well. So I'll be using the same 5/8 inch swept back bowl gouge, and I'll make a push cut from the outside to the center. This cut wants to move the bowl gouge around because it's only getting hit by one side of that blank. So what you really need to do is you need to apply downforce onto the tool rests. You don't really want to try to ride across the surface by pushing on the surface at all. You want to be pushing down on the tool rest. That essentially just makes the wood cut a lot easier. You're essentially leaving the bowl gouge in one position and waiting for that side of the bowl blank to come around and be shaved away, instead of the other way around, letting the bowl blank dictate the position of the gouge. So apply a lot of down pressure to the tool rest at this point. Okay, now I've got that relatively flat. It's balancing out. I'm able to get the lathe speed up a little bit faster, and that's going to allow me to cut with a faster pace, and everything starts to become a little bit more smooth once we get the bowl blank more balanced. Because I'm leveling this off, and I had an irregular bottom shape to this bowl. I'm going to be left with this nub in the center of the bowl blank, and I'm not really going to want that, so I'm going to need to chisel that away in just a moment. But first I'm just going to keep smoothing this off until I get down to a relatively flat base on the bowl. You can take your bowl gouge and line it up along that flat surface. You can see if it's flat or not. There was actually a little bit convex, so I'm going to make another pass here to smooth that out. And you can see that nub that's occurring there. I'm going to be forming the tenon and the shoulder there, and I don't need an additional nub sticking out. That's looking really good. That branch hole is still present, and it looks pretty large. Okay, so I'm going to take this out of the lathe, then I'm going to take it back to the chisel and the mallet, and I'm going to take that off. Now this wood is very fibrous, and it's running at angles, especially with a crotch piece like this. So what I want to make sure is I get any loose material out of there. It looks like it's flat, however, I chiseled underneath the section and loosened it up. And I really want to break all of that away because I need a good solid connection here with the tailstock. So get all of that loose wood out of the way. It's one of the characteristics of mulberry. It's not the reason why people hate this tree. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, but one of the characteristics of mulberry is very fibrous. And the fibers run quite a long way, so you can actually pull it and rip it. It's almost like celery. So I'm going to do my best to line this up. It's not going to be lined up perfectly true, but it's going to be pretty close. I'm going to continue turning so it'll round itself or square itself up again. So I'm going to make a pass across here. You can hear that difference and the fact that it's just a little bit out of center. But since we're so at the beginning of this turning, it's not a big issue that we're off center right now. That's all going to be rectified here shortly. Okay, so the bottom's looking nice and flat. I'm going to go ahead and mark my tenon. And I'm just going to continue push cuts up to that tenon line, which will leave me with a cylinder that'll be used for the tenon. The tenon is probably the most important part of any bowl turning. If you haven't already seen my video all about turning a perfect tenon, you might want to check that out. A lot of people have issues with tenons when they first start out bowl turning. And there's some key elements that you really need to know when you're shaping your tenon. So there's the tenon cylinder. Now we're going to go ahead and shape the shoulder, which will be right above the tenon. I like to have a decent shoulder area and a tenon area because I can use that location to shape the foot of the bowl later. And the shape of the foot does not have to be dictated by the size or shape of the shoulder and the tenon. I can make a dramatically small foot, or I can do a variety of different things with the foot, especially if I have extra material there. So I kind of think of the shoulder and the tenon as the last steps of turning and the design process as well. How do I want to shape the foot of the bowl? All right, so I'm taking a look here. There's some loose bark on this, and I'm going to start taking off the corner and really start to shape this bowl. I'm going to use my 3/4 inch 40/40 grind bowl gouge. Now, there are people out there, there are turners that are well known that love using the 40/40 grind bowl gouge. And I'm sure it's a great tool and I'm sure it works great for them. I don't really care for it that much. I prefer the 55-degree angle bevel much more for general turning. However, for whatever reason, I have found that the 40/40 grind is excellent at removing roughing material quickly on a bowl blank, just like this. Also, the fact that this bowl gouge is 3/4 inch makes it nice and sturdy. I'm applying a lot of down pressure to the tool rest, and it doesn't get bounced around a lot like the smaller or narrower bowl gouges do. So I'm just going to keep working my way around here. Got to bring that tool rest up so I get good tool support. Even though I've got a really sturdy bowl gouge, you still want to get that tool rest up as close as possible. So the 40-40 grind, in case you're not familiar with it, essentially is the angle of the top nose is, the top wings are 40 degrees from the nose up. The bevel is 40 degrees. And the side wings are 40 degrees, so that's why they call it a 40-40 grind. And there are some turners that have made this very popular, and it's interesting because as popular as this is, most turners cannot finish a bowl with this, because when you get into the interior of the bowl, the 40-degree bevel angle doesn't allow you to get down into the base of the bowl very easily. That's why I really prefer the 55-degree bevel swept back gouge, because I can basically turn an entire bowl with the 55-degree bevel swept back gouge. All right, so I got a bunch of that material roughed out, and now I'm back to my 5/8 of an inch swept back bowl gouge, and I'm noticing things are not performing as well as I would like them to. So that's a good indication I need to sharpen. One of the things I teach in my tool sharpening online e-course is the fact that we need to really be alert and pay attention to the performance of our bowl gouge. When we go to the sharpening station like we are right now, and we go back to the bowl and turn, we've got a really nice smooth cut usually that occurs, and it's effortless. The progression between that effortless clean cut and the poor cut that I was just getting is so subtle that if we're not paying attention, we won't notice it. So we really need to be alert and be aware that if our performance of the bowl gouge is diminishing, we need to go sharpen. Because essentially, when you cut this smoothly like I am right now, just after sharpening, that's what you want to be doing at all times. Now, some woods will allow your bowl gouge to stay relatively sharp for a much longer period of time. Harder woods like this mulberry do not. They will wear down that edge relatively quickly. So it's not uncommon in a turning like this that need to go sharpen every 5 or 10 minutes. There's nothing wrong with that. It's also another great case for the CBN wheels. The CBN wheels on the sharpening station are somewhat expensive, obviously. The aluminum oxide wheels that come with most grinders are relatively inexpensive. However, if you sharpen with an aluminum oxide wheel, you're going to see your tool metal essentially just dissolve, almost like sharpening a pencil. But with the CBN wheels, you barely see any material being taken away. So you can go back and apply a nice sharp edge without removing a lot of your tool. And over time, you're going to have a lot more tool saved by using CBN wheels. So that initial upfront expense of a CBN wheel basically gets washed out over time as you're saving your turning tools. So I'm working on the curve here in the shape, and I'm using a pull cut. That was a pull scraping cut to work down from that shoulder out to the outside. Now I'm going to use a push cut. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. This is the gouge I go to make nice refining cuts. And in this case, I'm making nice finishing cuts on the outside shape of this bowl. There are a couple high spots here, so I'm using a shear scrape cut here. I've got a video about that if you'd like to check it out. Essentially, a shear scrape is just going to be a really nice light scrape that's going to allow you to make some really nice refining passes across the bowl surface and get the shape exactly the way you want it. With a winged vessel like this, you really want to be careful and keep the bowl gouge on its path. Here I'm just very carefully moving it across the tops of those wings. If I were to slip and move into the bowl, I'm going to get whacked pretty good by one of the wings coming around. So you want to be careful that you're just gliding on the tool rest. Let the wood come around and be cut. Don't push the tool into the wood itself. I'm going to square up the shoulder with just a little scraping cut, and then I'm going to switch to my spindle detail gouge. The spindle detail gouge I use right on the edge of the tenon, and I will make a push cut in towards the shoulder at about a 10 or 11 degree angle, which closely matches the angle on my four-jaw chuck. You really want to make sure you get this dovetail angle right. Now I'm cleaning out the little crevice down between the tenon and the shoulder so there's no excess material in there, and the four-jaw chuck will be able to get a good grip on the tenon. So I'm going to pop out the spur chuck and attach my four-jaw chuck. And we'll reverse the bowl blank onto the chuck. Now, mulberry is pretty interesting. This wood I got in Illinois, and this is a common tree that grows in fields and in ditches and in hedgerows. But there are lots of people that really do not like mulberry trees. And if you have a mulberry tree around, you could probably finish the rest of the story. Because if you're not familiar with mulberries, mulberries are like a deep purple berry, and birds absolutely love them. So you have two issues here. You have the issues of the berries falling off the trees just by themselves, which can be a mess. They stain a lot. They're very acidic, or they have a staining property. I actually don't know if they're acidic, but they seem to stain very, very easily. So if you have them around your house, or if they come off on the sidewalk or in your car, they can stain just by themselves. But compounding that problem is the birds love these berries. So if you put two and two together, the next situation is if you have mulberry trees around and you have birds that are loving them, the mulberries have to come out somewhere. Yeah, and when they come out, they're just as purple as when they went in, and they seem to be they seem to be even less desirable when they come out and stain cars and all sorts of different things. So there's people that really don't like them because of the fact that birds excrete them throughout their environment and make a big mess with them. The interesting fact, though, is that if you're driving around the countryside in Midwest United States, you might see dozens or hundreds of mulberry trees all in the ditch, all in a row. And you might be thinking, well, I wonder why the farmer planted all of those mulberry trees. Well, the other fun little fact is he most likely did not plant those mulberry trees. Most likely the birds planted them. And the birds are great farmers inadvertently, because they essentially can plant the trees in a nice straight line. And the reason they can plant them in a nice straight line is because the power line above the ditch is in a nice straight line. So you can imagine the power line with birds landing on it, and the birds planting the mulberry seeds just perfectly in a nice row along the ditch. Some farmers take advantage of this and use the mulberry bushes and trees as a great windbreak for one side of their fields. Other farmers are just offended by it, and they remove all of the trees as soon as they start sprouting, or cut them down later. In this case, this is a larger tree that was cut down and thrown in a big scrap pile. This is a very good burning firewood for winter, for heating. It burns very, very hot, so it's very desirable for heating homes. I was fortunate enough to grab a few pieces of this to make some beautiful bowls out of it. So now you know why some people hate the mulberry tree. All right, so what I'm doing here is I wanted to give you this viewpoint. I'm looking straight down into my bowl blank, and what I'm doing is I'm lining up the bevel of the bowl gouge with the exterior of the bowl, and I'm making them parallel to make this inside thin cut. And this is the view it's close to the view that I have while I'm turning. I'm not watching the bowl gouge closely. I'm looking down at the overall shape of the bowl and the position of the bowl gouge. That's how I'm able to make those thin walls, because I'm essentially just lining up the bevel of the bowl gouge with the exterior of the bowl. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I like to save the inside as a counterbalance to stabilize the bowl blank as I turn. And I basically work down the bowl, nibbling a little way down the wall, establishing the wall thickness, and then remove material in the center of the bowl and continue down that way. That mass that you see in the center of the bowl right now is stabilizing those wings. So the wings barely flex because there's that large mass. If I had worked the opposite way and hollowed out the center of the bowl so that by the time I got to the thin wings, there's no material at all in the middle, the bowl itself would flex because of its irregular shape. And that flexing would make it very hard to A, make a smooth cut, and B, make a even wall thickness throughout the bowl. So instead, I used the method of working from the outside or the wall down and then remove the center last, so that stability is maintained throughout the turning. I personally love turning mulberry. The color of the wood, the grain, it's just gorgeous. It's not a typical brown wood. It's just got such a nice appearance to it. I love turning mulberry. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. Now if you hear me referring to the swept back bevel, that's essentially, some of the other names are an Irish grind or a long wing grind or the Ellsworth grind. David Ellsworth likes to use a bowl gouge profile that's very similar to this. Now, you can see I'm tearing out grain fibers there, and that's not a big deal. I'm not really worried at this point because I'm just roughing out the shape in the interior. So I'm not too concerned with that. I'm putting in my 12-inch curved tool rest so I can get a little bit closer support for the bowl gouge in the curve of this bowl. So now I'm going to work out some material around the wall so that I can work down the next section of the wall. And these are simply push cuts. Even though I'm going left and right, they're just push cuts. Essentially, if the nose is leading the cut, it's a push cut. So you see the bevel nose leading. Now I've switched around and I'm going from left to right, but the nose is still leading. This is a push cut. So I'm making really light cuts here, and I'm working down to meet the thickness. And I've switched from the 5/8 inch to the 1/2 inch. Actually, I was using the 5/8 inch there because I was just removing larger amounts of material. I went down to the 1/2 inch bowl gouge here. The 1/2 inch has a smaller cutting area. When I say smaller, we're talking about 1 millimeter or 2 of cutting area. And what that does is it forces me to slow down. It slows down the pace, and it makes a really nice finishing cut. You can make a nice finishing cut with a 5/8 inch swept back bowl gouge as well. You just need to slow down your pace and make a light cut, and you'll get a really nice finish with that as well. I tend to use the 5/8 inch more for roughing out material because it does remove more material quickly. But either tool will work just fine. As a matter of fact, I can turn this entire bowl with just this tool I'm using right now, the 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. It's just going to take a little bit longer in the roughing portion of it. So I'm working down 1 inch or 2 at a time on the sides of the bowl. And you can see how light that is. Now what I'm doing is a little technique is I'm sliding the bowl gouge backwards on the bevel. And as I do that, I can feel when it rubs and falls off that little high spot. And I can feel when it matches. Here I have the bowl gouge almost completely open. That was a very light cut. If I had tried to make an aggressive cut with that, I was going to get a catch. But for a really light finishing cut, you can push yourself and open that flute a little bit if you're comfortable enough doing it. If you know you're not going to get a catch anywhere. Wow, that hole is big. All right, I have to deal with that hole. I'm going to have to unmount the bowl blank from the chuck and remount it. So I'm going to mark the location that the bowl is sitting in the chuck so I can reset it there. Hopefully it will turn very true to the way it was turning. I'm going to use some gaffer's tape. Gaffer's tape is a really great tape. Some people look at this and say that's duct tape. Well, actually it's not. Gaffer's tape is a little bit different than duct tape. Actually has a much stronger adhesive and it leaves no residue. If I were to use duct tape here, I would have a sticky mess all over that wood I'd have to sand out or I'd have to work with. Gaffer's tape is really nice because it's strong, it holds, and it leaves no residue. I'll have a link for that in the description below along with everything else I use in this video. Okay, what I have here is some 5-minute epoxy, and I'm going to dye this similar to the orange-brown. This is actually a copper metallic mix or powder that I'm adding to the 5-minute epoxy. I'm trying not to make this hole stand out. The hole is so big, I really don't want it to stand out. Sometimes I've filled these with a turquoise color or a blue or something, and that's kind of nice, but this is so big, I really want it to blend in. If you see in the mulberry, there's a natural yellow color and there's kind of like an orange-brown color. I'm targeting that orange-brown color. You want to work the epoxy right up into all of the edges so it gets a really good grip on the hole. I'm actually going to sprinkle a little bit of the copper flakes in here. My concern at this point is I don't want this to look really even, and I don't want it to look like a chunk of plastic in the side of this bowl.
While we wait for that epoxy to dry, do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen. It helps this video and helps the channel, and I greatly appreciate it, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
The great thing about the 5-minute epoxy is, well, it's pretty much set up in 5 minutes. Now, to turn it, you want it to be cured a little bit. I waited about 30 minutes here, so it's good and cured. Gives you a couple moments to sweep up the shop and get organized, which is nice. I'm going to make a really light open cut just to shave off any high spots of that epoxy. And this is like the cut we made earlier. You can just make sure that's really light. I had the flute completely open. You want to make sure that that's just a really light shave that you're making there. And I was lucky enough because I marked the chuck. When I put the bowl back into the 4-jaw chuck, it's turning pretty true to the way it originally turned. So I'm making a very light cut with the flute very much open. This is probably less than 1 millimeter deep. And I'm just blending those surfaces together to get a good smooth surface over the top of that epoxy. And now I'll continue down, removing that center area. There's something mesmerizing about making those concentric rings. This is almost hypnotizing to turn. So now with the bowl mounted this way, I'm also going to move the tool rest on the outside, and I'm going to do a very light shear scrape across that epoxy area just to, again, true it up and to smooth the whole area around it. There you can see the epoxy building up in the bowl gouge. It's still a little soft. It's not solid cured yet, but it'll turn fine and then it'll cure solid over the next couple days. You can see the high spot there where it turned it off. I need to do the shear scrape down a little bit lower. The shear scrape is a very light pass, and it does a really good job for that use right there, just removing a very small amount of material. So the epoxy area has been trued up both on the inside and the outside, so it's sitting pretty flush to the wood surface is what I was looking for. So I'm going to continue across the center now. Now at this point, we don't want to go back up on those wings at all, because those wings are flexing. It may be very minor, but they're flexing, and you're going to hear a clicking sound if you try to do that, because the bowl gouge will engage with the wing or winged area, and then it will flex away from the bowl gouge, so there will be no sound, and then it'll come back and hit the gouge. So you'll hear a clicking sound if you ever try to turn the outside rim of a thin bowl like that. It's feeling a little bit thick in there, so I'm going to take another pass or two. Just make real light cuts. The inside of the bowl really needs to have a concave appearance. You hardly ever want the center of the bowl to be flat, and you definitely don't want it to be convex, and you don't want it to have ripples in there. So you want to make a nice gentle curve to the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to sand this out. Typically up on the wings there's going to be little tool marks. You're going to want to take the time and sand those down, smooth out those areas first. What I'm doing is I'm using the edge of the sanding disc to align with the grain of the wood, so I get a nice smooth sanding appearance there. And I'm going to also sand across that epoxy area. If you've noticed, I've been wearing my respirator throughout this video. The exterior portions of this wood are relatively dry, and there's a lot of dust coming off of that. The interior has some moisture to it. The wetter wood in the middle comes off as nice curly shavings. It doesn't make quite as much dust, but there's quite a bit of dust from the drier portions. And especially at this point, there's tons of dust with the sanding. Now what I'm doing is I'm moving around the exterior of this, and I'm removing all of the bark that's still attached. There's a cambium layer that's underneath the bark that will remain on and that will become the edge of the bowl. And I want to be careful that I'm matching and making the disc parallel to the actual surface of the bowl. Because on the sides there, it goes almost up at a 90-degree angle, where up on the top of the wings, it's flat. So I'll just work around the bowl and sand this and make everything nice and smooth. And I'll work through all the grits doing the same technique. Here you can see how I'm twisting the sanding disc from flat to sideways on the sides of the bowl to match the contour of that outer edge. Okay, so now with the piece sanded, I need to remove the tenon and shoulder and shape that into the foot of the bowl. I'm putting in one of my older jam chucks here, and I can see it's turning a little bit out of true. So all I need to do, since there's plenty of material here, is I need to just turn away a little bit of the front of this, and now it's turning nice and true. You don't want this to come to a point or even a curve, because that's only the tip of that curve or the point will grip the inside of the bowl. Instead, you want a flat or a round disc in the middle of the jam chuck like that. So you have a larger gripping area that will grip the inside of the bowl blank. So I'm going to pull the tailstock up, and I'm going to match it to the indentation that was there from the beginning of this turning, and it should turn pretty true. And it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to use a scraping cut with my 1/2" 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm just going to push into the material. I'm going to quickly remove that shoulder and take the foot down. I don't want the foot to be as big as the tenon. There are some turners that essentially just use the tenon as the foot and they're done at that point. But I kind of like the mystery of not knowing how the bowl was attached to the lathe, or putting a nice small foot on there so it looks as if it makes somebody wonder how in the world was this attached to a lathe with such a small connection area. So I'm going to work the base of the foot here. I like to make a concave area inside the rim of the foot, just so that just the ring of the foot is touching the tabletop. Now I have a little bit of a high spot there on the outside I need to take care of. I'm going to shear scrape that first, and then I'll sand that in to blend it into the rest of the sanded exterior of the bowl. You can see how light those shavings are that are coming off here. This is a very light refining cut. And then I'll sand that area and blend it all in. Typically when you reverse a piece like this, you're going to have little high spots and low spots. The sanding that you're doing right here and keeping the side of that sanding disc aligned with the grain will blend those in so they're not visible. Okay, so now with that exterior of the bowl shaped, I'm going to finish the foot of the bowl. And I'm going to show you a real common problem that occurs if you're not careful. Right here. Boom. The kickback. And if you want to know why kickback occurs, you need to check out this video of mine. I've got a video that explains exactly why that occurs. Even though I know why it occurs, it still happens to me every once in a while. So check out that video. If you've ever had that happen and you want to figure out why it's happening and how to prevent it from happening, make sure you check out that video. Okay, so I'm just going to keep working down and reducing this nub. You want to look down on this and make sure that that inside of the foot is definitely concave and not visible around the ring of the foot. Otherwise, the bowl will wobble on that center point. So I remove this nub and just keep nibbling this down. I'm going to switch over to my spindle detail gouge here. This will give me a little bit better access into this curve shape. That half-inch bowl gouge was, the bevel's a little large to be fitting into this shape. And we'll keep bringing that nub down in size. Now, if you're not comfortable doing this, you could take it off the lathe right now and just sand off that nub. Or you can cut it off and then sand it. But what I like to do is I like to keep going and bring it down to where it's just as small as possible. So there's not much area to sand there. And then I'll make a final cut inward and push into the thinnest area of that nub with a lot of pressure inward, and then turn the lathe off. Sometimes you have to twist it by hand. It'll cut off. This, again, the fibers of this wood are very long, so it didn't quite break off, but it's pretty loose at this point, and it's going to come off. Now I'm using a Jacob's chuck with a 2-inch spindle mandrel, and I'm putting a 120 grit disc on that. It's a great way to have good stability. I used to do this a lot with the drill. It's hard to hold the bowl and the drill at the same time and get a good result. So this is a great way to have the sanding disc stable and be able to sand that bottom off. Okay, so I'm applying shellac. Now this is shellac that I've mixed. This is a 1 pound cut of shellac. If you're interested in making your own shellac, or if you want some really high quality sealer, it's actually a tool because it can be used for so many different things. It's great for sealing loose ingrain, so it cuts really well, but it's also a great sealer for lacquer. This bowl is going to be finished with lacquer, but I'm going to seal it with shellac first. And there's the final piece. I love the colors of this wood. Look at all the grain patterns in that. There's a natural occurring phenomenon called chatoyance. That's where the light shifts directions And if you move this in the light just right, there's a vibration or a shimmer for the light because the grains of this wood are just, they're moving in different directions. It's absolutely gorgeous. And actually the hole filled really well. It's not super even. It's exactly what I wanted. There's a little bit of drip marks there from the shellac, but those will actually sand out.
Well, there we have it, a natural edge mulberry bowl. Boy, this had a pretty good sized hole in it. Normally, I like to leave those holes open and make the piece look natural. This guy was pretty big. This isn't gonna hold much soup with that hole as large as it was. So I went ahead and filled that, and hopefully you learned something from that and a technique that you can use to fill large holes if you need to. And all in all, I think the piece turned out pretty nice. It's a fun, gentle curving shape. We've got the top outer wings pretty much balanced with one another, and I think I like it. Tell me what you guys think. Leave me a comment below and tell me what your thoughts are. If you haven't already, do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen. And if you're not subscribing to this channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button. I got lots more videos coming your way and you're not going to want to miss any of them. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy turning. While we wait for that epoxy to dry, do me a huge favor. Click that like button below. And while we're waiting for that epoxy to dry, while we're waiting for the epoxy to dry, do me a huge favor.